Good afternoon and welcome to another webinar by Microsoft. My name is Nick Zulfikar. I'm the Director of Client Services. With me is my associate, Ron Hussain. He's our technology evangelist. He works hand in hand with our customers during their evaluation and implementation phase. He's been here for almost 10 years, so he has tons of experience. He also works very closely during our strategies and roadmaps. So you're in good hands. Well, we're very excited about today's webinar. It's about a very interesting and hot topic, how to migrate AppFabric applications to NCache. This is something that we've been hearing a lot about from our customers lately. As you know, AppFabric is nearing the end of support from Microsoft, along with some stability issues that we've been hearing about. A lot of customers keep asking about how best to migrate away from AppFabric to NCache. So we figured why not go ahead and set up a webinar and get into details in this. So Ron is going to take us through the actual steps of how best to migrate. And during this time, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the questions box, and I'll read them off and ask Ron about them. So with that, I will switch it over to Ron so he can take us through the actual presentation.
Very good. Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for the intro. Hi, everybody. My name is Ron. I'll be your presenter for today's webinar. And as Nick mentioned, the topic that we've chosen today is migrating off of AppFabric to NCache. And we'll specifically talk about NCache open source. We've recently enhanced our NCache open source offering, where we have made 90% of NCache features open source, so those are available as is. And then there are some of the features which are available in our enterprise, which are other than what you would normally see in open source. The agenda of today's webinar is to talk about AppFabric end-of-life issues. AppFabric is a great product. Primarily for .NET applications, but as Nick mentioned, it's end of life now. Microsoft has already announced the end of life for AppFabric, and soon its support would also be discontinued, right? So what are the migration options? And as Nick suggested, we get a lot of queries, a lot of questions around this, where people are asking how to migrate off of AppFabric. So this webinar is going to be a complete hands-on use case around that, where you have an AppFabric application, you have .NET applications which are using AppFabric, and why NCache is the best option out of available technologies, and how to migrate off of AppFabric using NCache features. So this is what we have in agenda. There's a questions tab on the GoToMeeting panel. If there are any questions, please feel free to post in, using that questions tab, and Nick would keep an eye on that and would jump in and ask those questions for you guys. So please keep this interactive, keep your questions coming, and we'll take it from there. All right, so if everything looks good, I'm quickly going to get started with this. I would just give you a quick overview of AppFabric. Since this is an AppFabric migration webinar, I would simply assume that you already know about AppFabric, but just for the sake of completeness, I would just quickly go around AppFabric, some of the details about AppFabric and its architecture. AppFabric is an in-memory distributed caching system. It's a .NET-based distributed cache. It's a free distributed cache offered by Microsoft. Microsoft initially released AppFabric 1.0 in June of 2010, and then they released another version of AppFabric 1.1 in April 2015. And there were only two versions. After that, it got discontinued. In I think 2016, they initially announced that you should migrate off of AppFabric, and then they extended their support until 2017, and now it has been extended till 2022. It's a great product. You could use it in web applications for ASP.NET Session caching. You can also use it for output caching, and then you could also use it within web application and middle tier services for database caching or object caching. And primarily, it's being utilized, or the usage around AppFabric is within .NET applications. It's written in .NET, and it's primarily for .NET applications. And the API that AppFabric exposes is also a .NET caching API. So we'll talk about different API approaches, and also session caching and output caching approaches, how to migrate off of this technology. But before that, we'll just quickly go over the architecture so that we align this architecture with other technologies such as NCache, and why NCache is going to be a better solution for this. AppFabric, the architecture breakdown is pretty straightforward. You have cache servers. You can formulate a cluster of these cache servers, and then you can create a named cache around this. So there would be a Windows service on each box, which is an AppFabric service, and that allows you to create a cache host process, and then you could join to a cache cluster using this Windows host process, and then it creates a named cache on all the available servers which you allocate as clustering resources. So you could start off with 2 servers, 3 servers, and then you can use this cluster as a source of data. You can push your data into this cache cluster, and you can read this data from this cache cluster for high performance reasons. And this is your NCache, AppFabric client, an application server. It could be a typical ASP.NET web applications. It could also be web service application, and then it could be any .NET application for that matter. The management and monitoring support within AppFabric is exposed through PowerShell. So that's the main API, the main commandlet that you would be using in order to interact with monitoring and management aspect of AppFabric. There were some issues with AppFabric which I would highlight going forward, but you must be familiar that there is a configuration database. So all the configurations, they could exist on a storage location or typically on a database. Then there was a majority rule, and then there was a concept of lead host as well. And we at NCache, I personally believe that these are against the peer-to-peer architecture scenario where you have some dependency on either on backend data sources, or there is a dependency within the cache cluster. And in this case, it's the lead host, and then there was a majority rule that you need to enforce in order to make changes to the cache cluster. We'll tackle all of these problems once we move on to our migration, and we'll talk about NCache features as a result of that. So assuming that this is pretty straightforward, I'll quickly go ahead and talk about AppFabric end of life issues. As Nick suggested earlier on, and as you must be familiar, that AppFabric is now end of life. Microsoft has already announced end of life, and was announced in April of 2016. If I can quickly get a blog around this, let's actually confirm the date as well. Right, so that's one of the blogs where it was initially announced that it is going to be end of life, and it was initially being supported until April of 2017, and then that support got extended until 2022. Right, so that's the last update on this. So it is now an obsolete technology. It's not going to be available anymore. Mainstream support ends around 2017, and then extended support also ends around 2022. So AppFabric is not an open source product, so there's no community to back it up. So you have to rely on whatever resources are available on MSDN. Some of the blogs are available that you can use as a reference, but at the end of the day, it's not being supported actively, or it's not being maintained actively by Microsoft itself. And Microsoft themselves have recommended to migrate off of this technology. And we'll talk about some migration options, and we'll draw a comparison between those options. Then there are no more bug fixes going to happen, no more enhancements, no more feature requests. If there is a Windows update or there's a compatibility update, if there's a security update, you would not get those updates anymore, because it's essentially an obsolete product now. And based on this, it's very risky to use this product anymore. If you have a production deployment and the vendor itself is recommending to migrate off of this technology, so you're essentially at a risk. So it's a risk, and it's very critical. If you see a bug, you don't have a solution to that. There would not be any bug fix around that. If there is an outage, if there's a memory leak, high CPU, or if there's a garbage collection related issue, there are no more fixes going to be available. So you need to make sure that you migrate off of this technology and do that on higher priority. I would say highest possible priority, because it's very risky to use this product anymore, and cost of failure with AppFabric is going to be very high, primarily because there's no solution going to be available in that case. So having established this, I'll talk about different migration options. AppFabric is a .NET based distributed cache for Windows shops. All the applications which are primarily developed and being used on the Windows environment. So essentially it's the .NET environment, and then the Windows was the deployment option for AppFabric. When you talk about the migration options, we have NCache, which is the main distributed caching product offered by Soft. It's 100% native .NET. It runs on Windows platform, as you would see AppFabric would run. It's the oldest, most stable .NET distributed cache. It was launched in 2005. AppFabric came along around 2010, and then the next version was 2015. Up till now, NCache has about 14 versions which are released, and our latest version is 4.9, and that's the one which has 90% of our features open source as well. And then it's much more powerful, fully supported .NET and Java clients, official support, 24/7 support, which comes as part of the purchase of NCache. And then we also have Redis. Redis is being pushed. It's a fast cache. It's being very popular now. It's non-native .NET. It's primarily deployed on Linux by Redis Labs, and then we have Windows implementation of that by Microsoft OpenTech. But primarily the .NET and Java clients are considered to be the third-party .NET and Java clients. So these are the two comparisons that I'll be covering in upcoming slides. But please let me know if there are any questions so far, and if there are any specific requirements around AppFabric migration, we'll tackle those sort of questions as well. Alright, so we'll discuss differences between NCache and Redis, and I'll build a case around NCache, why NCache is a better product in comparison to Redis. First of all, let's have a look at the deployment. Like I mentioned, NCache can be deployed on, actually it is deployed on Windows environment. Only prereq for NCache is .NET framework 4.0 to be precise. At the minimum, you need .NET 4.0 on the server end, and then you can use NCache in a client-server model from the .NET applications primarily, and then you can also use it from within the Java applications as well. You can start out with 2 to 3 caching servers, create the cache cluster on those servers as you would create with AppFabric, and then your applications, they can run NCache remote client or NCache client-side libraries through NuGet packages, and they can connect to this cache cluster for improving their performance, scalability, and reliability. Preferred platform is 2008, 2012, 2016, 64-bit operating systems. It runs on all Windows environments, so it's fully supported on there. And then there are a lot of database synchronization features that we can also use as part of NCache. And these are only NCache specific features, and I'll cover those in upcoming slides. Next, I'll talk about 6 different reasons why NCache is a better candidate for AppFabric than Redis. As a matter of fact, we've already done a separate webinar on this. I'll quickly take you to our website and show you a comparison here. Right, so within our comparison, we have a feature by feature comparison with Redis, and then there is a smart guide as well. Let me just add my ID here so that I'm able to review it. Alright, so there's a PDF which gets downloaded, and then there is a feature by feature comparison around Redis versus NCache, right? So you can see the list goes on. There are a lot of features which are not available in Redis, and NCache fully supports those. And then there is, let me just have a look at this one as well. And then there is a smart guide, a presentation link that you could actually use. So I've got a snippet of this. Let me just show you one more thing. There's actually a video around comparisons which talks about 6 different reasons why NCache is better than Redis. So you can actually look up that video on our YouTube channel, and this comparison would serve as a guidelines for choosing the best alternative. On this particular webinar, since the main focus is around AppFabric, but I'll quickly touch some of the points, 6 reasons. The video that we already have published will just pick a few of those points and talk about why NCache is a better fit when you're migrating off of AppFabric, and why is it better than Redis in comparison. First of all, I'll get started with .NET. NCache is also a .NET based product. AppFabric is also .NET. It's native .NET, and it's supported and primarily built for .NET applications. It runs on Windows environment, and that's also one of the reasons it would be a better fit in comparison to Redis. But as far as features are concerned, offerings are concerned, you can use keep cache, fresh features. Features around keeping cache fresh, primarily expirations, absolute and sliding expiration. These are the features which allow you to specify time-based expirations on items, and you can control whether an item stays in the cache for a specified period of time or based on the usage pattern, and that covers absolute and sliding expiration respectively. Then database synchronization, we have a lot of database dependency. You can map your objects onto your your database records, and you can define a dependency between cached objects and database records, and any change in the database records would automatically invalidate the items from the cache. And this would not just be invalidation, it can also be reload of the data. So full synchronization can be achieved with the help of NCache. And then you could also have relationships with file and non-relational data sources. For example, there are XML files, configuration files, and you've cached some objects which depend on those. You can even define a dependency between a file and the cache items. Any changes on the file, the content of the file would invalidate the items in the cache. And then you can handle relational data in a distributed cache in NCache. The relational data in the database, when migrated to NCache, you can define relationships between different keys. So you can use cache key dependency. Second factor would be SQL-like searching. On the cached items, you can get an SQL-like search. You can select products where product.price is greater than 10 and product.price is less than 100. So you can even search items based on SQL-like search APIs. So you would get the similar view of the cache as you would be dealing with database. And it's pretty fast in comparison. Link queries are also supported. That's another avenue. And then logical grouping within NCache is very strong in comparison to Redis. We have groups. You can logically align your data into specific groups. Although data exists individually, but that data is still representing a group. And you can deal with all those items as a collection inside NCache. You can get group data, you can remove group data, you can update the group data as needed. Tags are keywords which get attached on top of your items, and again a way of formulating logical collections inside NCache. So that's another way you could formulate logical collections and deal individual objects as a collection inside NCache. And based on the tags, you can get items as needed.
So Ron, I have a question here, real quick. Somebody's asking, how does NCache support entity framework? So maybe you want to talk about that a little bit more.
Sure. NCache also supports entity framework, and it has two options around that. Since there's a separate webinar which covers entity framework caching, but just for the sake of completeness, I'll quickly go over and show you the entity framework. Just to comment on this, we have samples which come installed with NCache, and within .NET, if you quickly go to entity framework, there are two options. We have a no-code change cache provider for entity framework for EF 6.1 and EF Core as well, and then we also have object caching support. So you have two options. You can plug in NCache without any code changes, and that will give you query caching. It's limited, but it gets the job done. And then we have object caching support as well, where you can introduce NCache API calls directly inside your entity framework application and start using NCache for that matter. And that's much more powerful, and we have a detailed documentation around that. But just to answer your question, NCache fully supports entity framework for second level cache without any code changes, as well as with code changes using NCache API calls. I hope that answers your question. Please let me know if there are more questions. So we covered SQL searching, that's point number 2. Then we have server-side code. In comparison to Redis, AppFabric, migration, NCache would be a better option because it provides you read-through and write-through. Data access layer providers can be plugged in with NCache. You can have cache loader provider which can pre-populate the cache with your code. You can always have some of the data in the cache available each time cache starts up. And then we have big data processing through MapReduce and some of the compute grid features such as entry processor. So these are features which are only specific to NCache. Redis completely lacks those, and AppFabric also does not have those features. And then we have a client cache, powerful client cache. As a matter of fact, we just had a customer discussion, and client cache was not working properly with AppFabric, and that was one of the reasons, along with end-of-life support, that they wanted to migrate off of this technology and wanted to use NCache. With NCache, we have a no code change option client cache, local near cache support. It's fully synchronized. You don't manage anything as far as synchronization goes. You don't even manage the access to the client cache. It gets used automatically behind the scenes, and it gives you improved performance, and it also provides in-proc caching support as part of this. That's another feature where NCache is better in comparison to Redis. And alongside that, we have a lot more topologies. If you go over the feature by feature comparison, you would see that local cache, client cache, replicated cache, these are not supported in Redis in comparison. And then finally, we have multi-data center support. You could have one data center cache replicated across data center using the bridge in an active passive for DR scenarios and an active for both data centers being active at the same time. And bridge manages this without any code changes and without any additional cost incurred on the client end as far as your applications are concerned. So behind the scenes, it replicates data, and you have both data centers in sync with each other. And finally, this should be reason number 4 and 5 and 6. Platform and technology. We have Windows 100% native .NET deployment. It's written in .NET primarily for .NET applications. It runs on Windows environment, and we have official .NET and Java client in comparison to Redis. So I think this would give you enough information to go through. And on top of it, we have a video available on our YouTube channel, 6 reasons why NCache is better than Redis. That's essentially the same content, but in a more elaborate manner. And then we have a comparison that you can review in order to make a better decision around this. Alright, so coming back, I'll quickly, now that we've discussed AppFabric end-of-life issues, now we've discussed different migration options, and we've drawn comparison between Redis and NCache. I'll quickly talk about, assuming that you would go with NCache because that's going to have more features, more capabilities in comparison. I'll discuss our migration options next.
So Ron, let me ask another question that has been posted. Could you talk a little bit about if NCache can run in cloud environment, namely Azure or AWS?
Okay, very good. Yes, NCache, there are many deployment options to choose from. NCache can run on-premise. That's the conventional deployment that you would have with AppFabric as well, that you have your VMs and then you install software on top of those VMs or physical machines. It could be also a hosted environment, again VM model, and then it could also be in Microsoft Azure as well as in Microsoft, in AWS, Amazon Cloud. The deployment for NCache in the cloud is pretty straightforward. You would need to have it's available on their marketplaces as well, and then you need to install NCache on their VMs. We've gone with the VM model, and then on the client end it could be VM, it could be microservices, app services, or thin client for that matter. And it fully works. You bring your own licenses to the Azure, and then you activate and use NCache as needed. And when you need to spawn new instances, you could have an image of NCache installed on it from our side, and then you can get started with it at runtime. On the client end, it's pretty flexible. That's the main point of concerns. A point of concern where you would have installation bound to an instance, and you don't have an underlying VM for applications. And we have a webinar separately around this, where we have microservices, app services use case handled with the help of our NuGet packages for Microsoft Azure as well as for AWS client. I hope that answers your question in regards to cloud offering. Please let me know if there are more questions. All right, so now that we've built initial details, let's quickly talk about migration options. We have 2 migration options, and primarily this is 2 migration options for data caching, right? We have divided this presentation into 2 sections. We have data caching, and then we have ASP.NET Web Caching that you might want to be migrating off of AppFabric. These are the 2 kinds of applications that you would be using and AppFabric within, right? So you could have one application which is dealing with data caching, or it could be same application which is dealing with data caching, and then this could also be a ASP.NET Web which is interested in ASP.NET Web Caching. And primarily in web caching we have session state and output caching that you might have been using with AppFabric. So let's talk about application data caching first, and then we'll move on to our ASP.NET caching migration options. For NCache migration, these are pretty straightforward. We have our wrapper approach, which is a no code change option. It's very easy. You just change the namespace and get going. It's very easy to adopt. If you have an existing AppFabric application which is running fine, you've already tested it with AppFabric, the behavior is good, the business logic is in place, and you now want to migrate off of this technology and start using NCache, all you need to do is download our wrapper and then get started with that wrapper. your AppFabric APIs would work seamlessly with NCache APIs, and we've implemented that wrapper already. The source code of that wrapper is open source. It's available on GitHub, and it's available on our website as well. And then the other option is that you make direct NCache API calls, where with some code changes you would have to replace your existing AppFabric APIs and start using NCache APIs. There's no logic change. We have exact same API because we're the oldest, most .NET distributed cache available. So we sort of set the standard for APIs, right? So and by virtue of that, we have a lot of APIs common with AppFabric. And then we can start replacing the APIs of NCache with replacing the AppFabric, and you could get much more powerful support of NCache APIs within your application. So these are the two migration options. Let's talk about these one by one. We'll first discuss NCache wrapper approach, and I'll show you all the steps which are involved in it. So let's quickly go through the steps. First of all, you need to download NCache wrapper of AppFabric from our website, right? And there are two options around that. You could actually go to our website, go to the download page, NCache, and within the download page we have this AppFabric wrapper, and we recently got this updated with our 4.9 open source assemblies, right? So that's something that you could, and if you click on it, it would take you to our GitHub repository for AppFabric, and it comes under, there are some binaries. These are the assemblies, the released version of assemblies, the sample application, which I'll show you in a bit, and the source code as well. And then there's a README file which you can go through, and it talks about step-by-step approach in order to get this running in your environment for an AppFabric. So that's all what you need. It's pretty straightforward, and let's go through the steps. I have downloaded the wrapper implementation, and if I quickly take you to our wrapper, let's see if I can do that. Is there a question, Nick?
Ron actually had a question. Are there any limitations if you're using the wrapper in the application?
All right, that's a very good question. Since AppFabric wrapper that is designed by NCache, and it's written in regards to AppFabric, right? So the only limitation that you would see with this is that you would be limited to AppFabric APIs, because it's only designed for AppFabric migration use case. It's not going to include new APIs or other APIs which AppFabric lacks, and NCache has those APIs. So that's the only drawback. But for quick and easy migration, this could be first step, and then you can use NCache APIs in an incremental fashion. Once you have migrated off of AppFabric and started using NCache using this wrapper, which I'll showcase in a bit, the next thing would be that you start using NCache APIs which are not available in AppFabric, and you build on top of what you've already accomplished. That's the only limitation.
So can we still use NCache APIs for the wrapper?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I meant. Once you have downloaded the wrapper and your existing application, which was compiled and running with AppFabric, it has been migrated off of AppFabric using the wrapper. Within the same application, you can now include NCache client APIs and start using NCache APIs as well. So whatever which was missing within AppFabric, you can incrementally start using those APIs as well. So that's something that you can develop at any point in time, at a later stage, or while you're migrating off, you can decide to develop that. So with this approach, wrapper would not give you any limitations. And like I said, the only limitation is that if you only use wrapper approach and you do not use new APIs which NCache or the ones which are not in AppFabric, NCache APIs, in that case you would be limited to AppFabric functionality, and you would be missing out on a lot of good features, a lot of advanced features that NCache offers on top of in comparison to AppFabric. Alright, I hope that answers your question, and I'll quickly show you the AppFabric. This is what I've downloaded. Let me just take you to the folder. So from the Git, this is what you would get, the wrapper, right? It has binaries, which is the data caching DLL, which I'll show you in a sample application as well. And then you also have a sample application, which I'll open in a bit. And then we also have the source code, and this project is being opened right here. And you could see that all we have done is, I'll show you a quick example of this. Right, so we have our namespaces. These are the namespaces that you need at the minimum, web.caching and runtime. And what we've really done here is that we have all your AppFabric APIs mapped onto NCache APIs. If you go to cache.add, this is an AppFabric API footprint, data cache item version add, and then it is returning NCache API. If I go to definition of this, this is basically cache.add. This is basically an NCache API, right? So actually this is cache.add. I'm sorry, actually I was trying to, this was AppFabric data.caching.handler, and then inside this we're actually using the add API, which is mapped onto NCache. Similarly, for data cache item version, we're actually returning an add, which is again mapped onto NCache. So that's how simple it is. Let's have a look at the clear. So this has already been done. Let me just go to inside this, and within this you should see ncache.raise custom event. So for every single API that you see here, let's go through a few more. For example, unlock or locking API, you would see ncache.lock API. So for every single AppFabric API, we've already done the hard work. We've implemented the NCache equivalent APIs, and you would get the same behavior without any code changes. Now, if you, the other thing that that is interesting around this API is that you could actually use your own NCache version to support this wrapper. It's open source. Currently, it's being utilized by NCache.runtime and Web 4.9 open source assemblies. But you plan on going with enterprise, you can just recompile this with the new version of assemblies. You can even make changes within the wrapper because the source code is shipped as part of this download, and then you just need to rebuild and start using the updated assembly. So it's very flexible in that. And now, next thing that I'll do is I'll show you what is involved in order to start using this wrapper. You've downloaded the wrapper, and as part of that, you have this assembly which consumes all the mapping information, the wrapper information, the implementation of wrapper, where AppFabric APIs would seamlessly work with NCache APIs. This assembly needs to be referred as part of your application instead of AppFabric assembly. And let's go through this step by step. So first of all, you need to download the wrapper, get the assembly, ncache.data.caching.dll. I've already done that. And then you simply include reference to this and chain the namespace of AppFabric assembly with this one. And I'll show you within a sample application. Alright, we have a sample application right here, and if I take you to the program, this is a sample that we've built specifically for this, and this gets shipped as part of the download, so you have full access to this sample as well. I'll take you on the top. Alright, so first step that you need is you need to add reference to ncache.data.caching. So that's the main wrapper assembly, which consumes all the functionality of mapping AppFabric APIs to NCache APIs. And then next thing is that you should have an AppFabric client-side assembly reference. Instead of that, you need to use NCache AppFabric wrapper assembly reference, ncache.data.caching, and that's it. Every single API of AppFabric would work as is. These are the two steps that you need: download, and then include reference and change namespace. And if I quickly run this sample application, this is using demo cache, right? These are AppFabric settings. I'm just adding this key right here within the config, and then I have a client which is actually using this cache. Right, there is. So it's using the demo cache information. It should be using this from app settings, but I was playing around with it, so I just hard-coded the cache name. I'll create this cache, and then I'll be able to use the same sample which was previously working with AppFabric now with NCache. So next I'll create, I'll take you to our demo environment. So we have two servers which we'll be using for NCache. Alright, with NCache, you have pretty elaborate PowerShell commandlets, right? So you have create cache, start cache, stop cache, add node, add client nodes, import and export data from the cache. So you could either work with these. This is enterprise list, but these are also available in open source. And then we also have GUI tools. That's another feature where AppFabric and Redis are not at par with NCache. Right, so I'll quickly go through this because I need to save time. So I'll quickly go through creation of the cache through a GUI-based tool, management tool. I'll create a named cache and demo cache. I'll pick partition replica cache. This is our most recommended topology, which I'll cover towards the end as well. async because it's faster. And here I specify the servers which are going to host my cache cluster. So these are my caching cluster, my cache servers within the cluster. And TCP/IP port NCache is all driven through TCP/IP based clustering. Size on each server. I'll just go ahead next. Evictions are also available. You can turn off evictions or turn on, and based on their usage pattern, NCache can automatically evict data if the cache becomes full, or you can provide a big enough cache size so that it never becomes full. And auto start this cache so that it gets restarted or started each time you reboot a server. And that's it. That's how simple it is to get started with NCache. And then I'll quickly use right here. That's my box from where I plan to run that AppFabric application with the wrapper. A few other things, you can start and test this cache cluster, and then I'll actually run the wrapper and show you how easy it is to make it work. Alright, I'll right click and choose statistics. This is NCache performance counter statistics window, and then we have monitor cluster as a specific tool which comes installed with NCache for monitoring purposes. So nothing is being driven at this point. I'll run this sample. We have added the reference to alachi.NCache.data.caching, and as part of that we've also replaced the assembly already. Let me just it's a pretty elaborate sample. Let me just see if I can drag and drop here. Okay. Alright, so this has been done already, and now I'll just quickly run this sample application and show you a step by step. I'll just prepare a client which gets a handle to the cache cluster that we've just specified, and I'll go inside the implementation of this basic operations. Right, so next I'll go inside, and then a few steps. Alright, and it's printing something. So region for general use in default cache, that's our first use case. So these are all AppFabric APIs, and I'll show you these APIs. So first step is simple add and get through version, through tags. So I'll quickly go through it. So you could see that this is my default cache.add, and this footprint item version, and this is from AppFabric, but now it's being driven through alachi.NCache.data.caching because we've replaced the namespace. It would pass one item should be added in the cache. Right, one client is already connected, and we have an item in the cache on this server right here. This would add some bit of data as well. Second is getting the same item back, so it actually got the object which it added. This is my object which was retrieved successfully, so this is a pass on get. Then we'll get with an incorrect key, so we did not find the object, we got null, so that's working as well. And then it would go ahead and try this one more time, same test. So everything passed, right? So this is a success on the APIs, and then it gets advanced with get and lock, get if newer, and put and unlock. So these are next batch of operations. So it's using versioning features within NCache, and those features are pretty similar within AppFabric and NCache. I think they had inspiration from one another. Alright, so now I'll get item version. You can see the item version here from the data cache. So item has been added, that's a pass, and then it tries to lock it. That's again a pass because it was unlocked already, and then it tries to get it, and it gets it on the version as needed. So this is also a pass. So it's able to perform all the APIs, get and lock from AppFabric, and it fails because it does not have the same lock handle, and that's intentional. So I'll just keep doing this, and it would be able to map all the AppFabric APIs to NCache without any code changes. So that's the easiest possible option for migration from off of AppFabric to NCache, because we have a wrapper approach, and this is the most common use case or way of actually getting started with NCache, especially if you're migrating off of AppFabric. And then everything is working, right? So I'll just hit play here so that we cover everything. So you could see that there are a lot of, and then these errors are intentional because item was not on the specified version. Item does not exist at the specified version. So in NCache it raises an error if the version is not matching, and then you had a lot of items which were added. And if I come back here, now we should have some 21 items here and 1 item here, and then we have some activity which it's not being actively using NCache at this point. It was being debugged, but that's the main idea. I hope it was pretty straightforward. Please let me know if there are any questions around this. So this completes our wrapper approach. Let me just reiterate: you need to download the wrapper assembly, the wrapper project, the wrapper source code, and the release assembly comes as part of that. You add reference to that wrapper assembly, and then you replace application server.caching assembly with ncache.data.caching assembly, and that would just consume all existing AppFabric functionality with NCache as a source. NCache libraries would be used, and you just need to run and test the application. I hope it was pretty straightforward. Next approach is to use direct NCache API calls, and then there was a question around it. You can use these two approaches side by side, and as a matter of fact, let me showcase these NCache APIs side by side, because that would make more sense. Here is NCache API. I have shown you this within the wrapper source code as well, but this is the connection object, cache.get, cache.add. Everything is in a key value pair, and then here is an example of API changes between NCache and AppFabric. So you have a get cache which gets changed with initialize cache. So you need to actually chain the API, and then there is a put which gets changed with insert. There is a get which is exactly the same, and then remove, which could be remove, which returns an object, and then it could also be a delete, which actually deletes an object in that case. So how to go about this? So all you need to do is use the same application which is already using wrapper. It doesn't matter. You need to add references to these two assemblies, alachisaw.ncache.runtime and alachisaw.ncache.web, and then these assemblies would help you consume NCache APIs directly. And you could even use NCache SDK NuGet package which comes with the SDK, so you don't even have to install NCache on the client machines. You can just use the libraries. Next thing that you need is you actually need to use NCache assemblies directly. That's our first assembly, client side, and then this is our second assembly. And then you need to actually migrate off of AppFabric APIs and start using NCache APIs directly. So you will have a cache object, right? And then within the application you could actually use cache.initialize cache. Assign this cache handle by making a connection to NCache initialize through NCache initialize object, and then you could say demo cache, right? And actually use this. It's not defined. Let me just see. And then use this cache handle and use NCache APIs directly. You could use add. You could also use insert. And as a matter of fact, I have a separate sample application which I can showcase here. So you would actually be dealing with get call, add call, insert call, right? So your APIs would change as part of that, right? So if I have to give you a quick example around this sample, your API would look something like, for example, if you go to the load test right here, my default cache would actually be changed to cache.add, right? So this right here, the default cache, would be replaced by cache.add. If I just do this, I think it should work, but it needs item version of NCache as well. So that's the simplest approach that you could actually take. So that's how simple it is to start using NCache API. It's pretty intuitive, pretty straightforward. A lot of APIs are very similar in nature, but like I said, you need to take this as a project where you actually start replacing AppFabric APIs with NCache APIs yourself. And in this case, you would have a lot of control on NCache. For example, you could use SQL-like searches with NCache, because that's an API which AppFabric does not have, but with NCache you have those APIs. You have groups, subgroups, tags, name tags, expirations, database dependencies. You have key-based dependencies, data access layer providers, read-through, write-through, cache loader. The list goes on. We have powerful pub-sub mechanism. So it a lot more powerful in comparison, and gives you a lot more control over what you could actually use as a caching. Please let me know if there are any other questions around data caching. I still have 2 more features that I actually want to cover. Please let me know if there are any other questions at this point. Assuming there are no more questions around this, so it's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go ahead with our next segment, which is ASP.NET caching. Alright, AppFabric comes with 2 providers. We have NCache ASP.NET session state caching, and then we have ASP.NET page output caching with AppFabric. These are no code change options with AppFabric as well, and you could cache sessions in AppFabric, and then you could also have page outputs cached with the AppFabric. And within NCache, this is something which remains the same. We have a sample application which I'll showcase. So it could be for ASP.NET as well as for ASP.NET Core, but let me just open this. So this sample application can be utilized for taking inspiration for what is needed for session state caching. I will quickly show you all the changes that you need for ASP.NET session state. And there are only 2. It's just a provider like you had with AppFabric, and with NCache you just need to use that provider as is, but NCache provider. Alright, so first of all, we have the web config opened. Alright, first thing that you need is add an assembly tag. Alachisoft.ncache.sessionsprovider version is 4.9. Right, this is available in open source as well. And then you replace your existing session state tag with NCache. That's it. Here you could see that this session state is NCache sessions provider. That's the assembly which is consuming this, providing this, and then you provide the name of the cache to be the demo cache. And that's it. There are some timeout value. If a session is idle for 10 minutes, it would be expired. You could have session app ID to specify sessions of different applications in the same cache, or you could create 2 different caches. If I run this sample application, it would start using the demo cache for session caching as well. So that's how simple it is to migrate off of AppFabric session state. You just need to replace their session state tag and start using NCache session state tag. And since it's already a no code change option on AppFabric side, it's going to be very easy, quick migration from AppFabric to NCache. And then while it's being run, I will also open another sample application which comes with NCache, and that's an output cache. Alright, so this is a guess game sample application which we had run, and it's able to, so it's a guessing game. It would allow you to guess items, and it must have created a session. Let me just restart, clear the contents. Now we have one client connected. Let me just clear the contents here so that I start over, and then I can add some numbers here. Session was lost, so it created a new session. So it's getting information for previous attempts from the session variable, and then on the server end we have one item in the cache, and its backup is right here. So it's being run properly without any issues. So that completes our session state caching use case. And finally, we also have output caching sample application, and you could actually plug in the Alachisoft ncache.web.n output cache provider, and then there is a section which deals with output caching right here. So that's it. It's a provider that we've implemented, and you could drive the provider using this output cache settings and by registering the provider. And one other thing for output caching, since it requires you to have your pages decorated with a header, so you need to have that header placed. So you need to decorate all your pages with the output tags that you need, right? So it could be controls within the web form or MVC page, or it could be the entire page itself. So that's how you would drive this. and like I said, it's a wrapper, it's a provider approach for that. Additionally, there are again some advanced features with NCache. You could use ASP.NET View State caching provider with RT code changes for ASP.NET sessions, and then you can also use SignalR backplane. That's also a no-code change option, and there's a sample application which is available with NCache. If you come right here, within NCache, we have SignalR chat application which covers the SignalR backplane. So again, these are some advanced features within NCache. So that completes our technical discussion. I'll spend some time on NCache architecture to give you some more details. But for data caching, we have two options: wrapper and API change. We covered all those approaches in great details. And then we have on the web caching, ASP.NET caching, we have session state provider and output cache provider with AppFabric that you can simply replace with NCache by making web config changes.
All right. Thank you, Rob. I just have another question here. Is there any document which covers the entire API references between NCache and AppFabric?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I collected this snippet from that document, right? So I can quickly show that document. If you go to our documentation, right? So, for example, NCache Programmer's Guide, it's available here. But a quick way would be that you actually search AppFabric on our documentation. And there is AppFabric to NCache migration guide, and that covers all the API AppFabric versus NCache versus AppFabric APIs, and it takes care of all those details. So that's the most relevant document in this case. A few more things before I conclude the technical presentation and then hand it over to Nick. NCache cluster is pretty dynamic. It's 100% peer-to-peer architecture in comparison to AppFabric as well as in comparison to Redis. There's no single point of failure. There's no concept of majority rule or lead host. NCache configurations are actually applied on the servers themselves. So there's no backend database for configuration management. So it's a purely peer-to-peer architecture, no single point of failure, 100% uptime, dynamic cache cluster with high availability and lots of good features. And then we have a lot of topologies. We have partitioned, where data is fully partitioned. We have partitioned with replica. And with AppFabric, you only have sync option. With NCache, we have sync as well as async backups. And then this is the same topology with 3 servers. And this can scale out linearly as needed. Some of the customers, and please let me know if there are any questions other than what we've covered so far. So please let me know if there are any other questions. Otherwise, technical portion is complete at this point.
Thanks, Ron. That was a great presentation. I'll wait for a few minutes to see if anybody has questions. I know it was a lot of content to digest, but let's see if somebody asks any questions today. Just to reiterate, we have the 3 versions of NCache available to be downloaded today. We have NCache Enterprise and NCache Community Edition, as well as NCache Open Source. So if you do decide to go with one or the other, you can download from our website, and the Enterprise and the Community Edition come up with an evaluation version that you can take a look at. And also during your eval, if you have any questions, if you run into any concerns, let us know. You can reach us by contacting support@alachisoft.com, and we'll be able to get back to you fairly quickly. I have a question from one of the attendees saying, since the open source does not have any official support, how do I get help if there is any during my migration process?
There are 2 options around that. One is that you actually get in touch with our support team and post a question to support@alachisoft.com, and they can route you towards right resources. And other option is to use our NCache Google group. We've recently launched an NCache Google group. There are some topics which are already published on this, and that's one other avenue that you can explore, where you can post in questions, and within a couple of hours, to a few hours, somebody from our team would get in touch with you, and then would actually guide you towards right resources. Open source is primarily use as is, but we have a pretty detailed documentation around it. And in comparison, community and enterprise, they come with official support from our side. Okay,
very good, very good. I don't see any more questions, so I think that's it for the day today. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. Thank you, Ron, for the lovely presentation. And just remember, if you have any questions, you can reach us at support@alachisoft.com. For any sales-related questions, you can contact us at sales@alachisoft.com. And we will hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Take care.